Hey everyone, I'm Nick DiMatteo, and welcome to episode 182 and video episode number 8 of 4T, the Thursday throwback track. Every week I take a release from my collection, I discuss it, I give you my take on it, I throw in some other things about it, about the culture of the time, and talk about how it's influenced my music. This week is the unheralded classic album, Buckner and Garcia's Pac-Man Fever. Released in 1982, it was an album full of songs that were tributes to the most popular video games of the time. This again was 1982, and even though video games had existed, I found out the first one was developed in the 1950s, but publicly, I guess, in the mid-1970s, early 1970s, Pong, and the Atari 2600 in 1977, which was my first love. Really, the craze itself didn't really kick off, I think, until Pac-Man. And one of the things I wrote down in the text here is that the title, as goofy as the title and the entire album is actually accurate. You kind of had to live it to know what it was like. But if you think about things like Fortnite or Minecraft or going back like Grand Theft Auto or Doom and Quake and all of those things and Call of Duty even, the shooter games, back even further to things like the Nintendo 64, the Super NES, Super Mario Brothers in general, so many other games, but in particular some of the big ones that created crazes that were so big that they became part of the culture even beyond video games. And some have stood the test of time, such as Super Mario Brothers and that entire world. Really, it all started, the first real craze that took hold of the entire culture was Pac-Man. There were other video games back then in arcades that were, to our minds, people like my brother and me and my friends who would hang out at arcades all the time, equally good, if not better than Pac-Man. I actually like Miss Pac-Man better than Pac-Man, that's later. But things like Donkey Kong, which came out soon after, Asteroids, Defender, Frogger, Centipede, things like that. The earliest ones from the very early 80s, many of which show up on this album, Pac-Man Fever. But really, Pac-Man was, it was a fever in the culture as a whole. It was a huge craze. I had already been into video games by then. Like I said, the 2600 was my first love, and I played it every single day. Anytime my parents and my brother and I would go out somewhere and they wanted some alone time, like say at a mall or at a casino or something, they would drop Dave, my brother, and I off at an arcade, give us some quarters, and we'd spend all of that money, just like the song says, playing video games. And it was one of my favorite things to do. Video games are still a part of my life. I pretty much just play on my phone now. Sometimes on the computer, sometimes the Nintendo Switch with my kids. But once they took hold of me, way back, they really never let go. And so when this album came out, it was immediately known as something goofy, a novelty album, novelty song, cashing in on a trend and the whole thing. But it did it well. And, I hadn't listened to these songs really in a very, very long time. I didn't realize that, first of all, Buckner and Garcia were veterans. They had been around for like a decade doing their thing before they made the decision to do this stuff. And that Jerry Buckner in particular was a professional songwriter who wrote for a lot of famous artists back then. So, they put their all into the writing and recording of this. They clearly did their research because the lyrics actually describe the gameplay in pretty much all the songs. And yes, I know that I'm talking about video game songs seriously, but that's one of the fun things that I like to do. But the point is, it wasn't just that this was cashing in on a trend, because other artists, tried to do that and didn't quite do it as successfully. Pac-Man Fever was a top 10 hit. It sold millions and millions of copies, and did help kind of feed into and spawn a craze. that fact that this album has, you know, such quality was kind of lost on me at the time, because I just figured it was a bunch of cheesy songs, and yes, actually, there are a bunch of cheesy songs. But one of the things that I discovered in re-listening to it was that it seems like each song was meant to mimic an artist of the time. I read a review that said that Ode to a Centipede, which, oh my goodness, if you ever had to listen to a heartfelt song about a poor lost soul doing the same thing over and over, which in this case is the centipede from the video game, this would be the song to listen to. And the reviewer said that it sounds a lot like an Alan Parsons Project song. And that's a perfect example of what of the impression I got when re-listening to this, was that these songs were mimicking other bands, or at least pop styles of the time, which is a cool thing to do. You know, they didn't have to do that, so they put a lot of work into it. You know, as far as how this has influenced me, well, I don't really do novelty songs. Every now and then I'll do a song that kind of has a tribute-y feel. Back in the 90s, in my legendary band Ape Cafe, with Pete Bradis and the gang, we did a kick-ass cover of Pac-Man Fever that we sadly never recorded. I wish we had. But when Pete picked that song to do, I was just in heaven, because, you know, in the mid-90s, that's not exactly the song or kind of music that you would admit to listening to or loving. But we were both around the same age, or are, and knew then that people would get it, and it was just fun, honestly. So that was a kind of a touchstone as far as this album goes. But every now and then I'll record a song that has that kind of tribute-y feel, at least, if not a novelty. A couple of songs that I wrote and recorded and produced for some film projects for my ex-film company, This End Up and Lock Load Love theme songs were both tributes to different styles, different bands, things like that. If you look up This End Up, Nick DiMatteo, Lock Load Love, Nick DiMatteo theme song, maybe add that in on YouTube, you'll find both of those songs, and you'll kind of get the idea of what I mean by tribute, I think, especially considering that lyrically they're meant to be kind of not serious, goofy, you know, and all that stuff. So that's about as close as I've come really to novelty tribute. As far as a song that I consider exclusively mine, or Rex, my band Rex, you know, actual genre, like that type of music, the closest really is probably a song from Rec, my album, The Sunshine Seminar, called KPS, which stands for Korean Pop Song. It is a tribute to K-pop music, which, if you don't know what it is, look it up. It's been a craze for quite a while now, actually, and it's not just going strong, it's probably bigger than ever. If you think of a band like BTS, you will understand what I mean by that. And that song not only is a tribute to that style of music, it also has slightly, you know, goofy lyrics, and it has kind of video gamey electronic sounds that go along. So that's probably the closest I've come to stuff like this. I'm still getting a kick out of listening to this. The link to Korean Pop Song is below, as is a different version of what I'm saying right now, text-wise. And the link to Buckner and Garcia's Pac-Man Fever, all the information on that. I urge you, as always, to read below, to click the links, to listen, to share, and to talk, because, as always, my main objective with sharing this music, my objectives are conversation and connection. I even have some talking points to start the conversation at the bottom there. One being, can you name the other video games that this album name checks? So look up the information, see if you can tell which one is Some Are Easy, like Frogger or Berserk. Can you identify the bands that each song was trying to mimic, such as Ode to a Centipede's Alan Parsons Project? What are your favorite video games? Do you like video games at all? Do you have any history with video games, or a present with video games? Do you hate video games? Do you like novelty songs? Do you hate them? These were certainly not the first novelty songs in history, or the last. Are there any others that struck your fancy when you heard them? Do you have a secret love for any of this music? those are all things to talk about. So please, as always, comment, hit me up any way you can, click all the links, go to my website, nickdimatteo.com, listen to all the music, look up the Sunshine Seminar on Spotify or iTunes and all that good stuff. And until next week, thank you and happy 2020.